Mike didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the living room. The light from the security monitors glowing across his face like firelight in a cave. He watched the porch feed, the driveway, and the side yard, where a figure had loitered. Last week, just long enough to clip the antenna on Ellie's wheelchair van. His coffee went cold by 4 a.m., but he didn't move. When Ellie woke, wheeling herself out to her usual spot on the porch, she found the ramp freshly reinforced with new bolts and support brackets. Mike stood behind her silently, tools still in hand, eyes scanning the neighborhood. "You didn't sleep again," Ellie murmured. She looked up at him with those soft gray eyes that reminded him of her mother. He managed a smile. "Too much coffee. You're not gonna let her win, are you?" Mike's jaw tensed. She doesn't get to define what winning looks like. By noon, another letter arrived, hand-delivered this time. Karen walked up in broad daylight like she owned the street, a manicured finger extended with a folded paper, between two fingers. "Your dog barked twice between 7 o'clock and 7:30 a.m., she announced, as if reading a criminal charge. "That violates the noise ordinance under Section 12. Mike didn't move from the steps. Karen faltered slightly but held the paper out again. "You need to take this seriously." He took it without reading it. "I take exactly one thing seriously, my daughter." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm just being difficult? This neighborhood has survived for 20 years without riffraff and sob stories disrupting the balance. You're not special." "She's not special." Ellie blinked slowly behind him, silent. Mike took a step forward. "You've made your point," he said evenly, but there was a heat under his voice that hadn't been there before. "You've filed your letters, your fake violations, your complaints. But this." He held up the paper. "This is your last one." Karen scoffed. "Is that a threat?" Mike folded the letter in half, then again, tucking it in his back pocket like a napkin. "It's a promise." Karen's smile cracked for the first time. She turned and walked off, but not before muttering, just loud enough, "Animals always bark before they bite." That evening, Mike reviewed every security angle. At 2:07 a.m., his porch camera caught movements, someone crouching near the dog fence. The feed was dark, but the posture, the shape, it looked like a woman in a robe. A flash of something metallic glinted in the moonlight. When he stepped outside, nothing was there except a shredded Ziploc bag near the water bowl. Mike collected it using gloves. Back inside, he opened it and sniffed. His stomach dropped. "Rat. Poison. He called the police immediately. An officer arrived by 3 o'clock, but it was the same cop who'd come last time, Karen's brother, Officer Willoughby. "You have video?" he asked dully, already shaking his head. Mike showed him. The cop squinted at the screen, then shrugged. "Could be anyone." "You sure it's not the kid from Lot 11? He's a prankster." "This isn't a prank, it's a felony." "I'll file the report," he said with a sigh. "But unless you got a name, nothing sticks. You should keep a better eye on your pet." Mike closed the door after him without a word. This wasn't just hostility anymore. It was escalation. First, the ramp, then the nails. Then Ellie's wheelchair. Now this. Someone was testing his boundary, step by step. Like they were daring him to push back. He stood by the porch window until sunrise, the glint of the poison bag catching the first rays of dawn like a warning flare. Next time, it wouldn't be the dog they came for. And if they crossed that line, Mike was done filing reports. Mike stood in the driveway, the next morning, the poison bag sealed in an evidence pouch on the hood of his truck. Ellie, silent beside him in her chair, clutched her sketchbook tighter than usual. Her service dog, Bear, stayed close to her wheels, growling low every time a car passed too slowly. "Should we leave?" she asked softly. Mike didn't answer right away. He looked down at the bag again, then across the street at Karen's house. Her American flag flapped in the wind, a mockery of what it stood for. She was watering her roses like nothing had happened. He shook his head. "We don't run. Not from people like that." Inside, he sat down at his laptop and began compiling a file, photos of the ramp tampering, video stills of the prowler, copies of the violation letters, times from the poisoned dog bowl. He backed everything up to a USB drive and tucked it under the false drawer in Ellie's wheelchair kit. If anything happened to him, she'd have everything she needed to tell the truth. That night, something changed. At 3:11 a.m., the side motion sensor tripped again. Mike didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed his pistol, stepped silently onto the back porch, and scanned the yard. A rustling behind the garbage bin drew his eyes. "Step out," he ordered. His voice was low, but forceful, force command tone. The kind that made grown men freeze. No response. He moved closer, every footstep measured. Then suddenly a figure dashed from behind the bin and sprinted toward the fence. Mike leveled his weapon. Stop now. The intruder vaulted the fence and vanished into the darkness. Back at the porch, he found the latch on the gate had been unscrewed. Tools lay beside it. The intent was clear. Someone was trying to break in. The next morning, Mike installed perimeter lights, reinforced locks, and mounted an extra camera over Ellie's room window. When she saw it, she didn't ask questions. Instead, she flipped her sketchbook open and quietly began drawing the intruder from Mamiria's shadow with wild hair, crouched like a feral cat, long sleeves, and something shiny tucked in the waistband. Sketch chilled him. It looked too much like Karen. 11 a.m. The HOA emailed a fresh violation. Illegal security installations. You are not authorized to install floodlights or camera units that may record shared property lines. Failure to remove them in 48 hours will result in mandatory fines. Mike printed it out, drew a smiley face on it with a Sharpie, and taped it to his front door. 2 hours later, the local power company showed up. We got an anonymous complaint, the worker said, eyes scanning the meters. Someone reported you've been pulling from the street grid illegally. I'm a retired soldier, not a hacker, Mike snapped. Sorry, man. Protocol. The search found nothing. But now, it was obvious Karen was trying to wear him down with layers of bureaucracy, force him to snap, or make a mistake she could weaponize. That evening, as Mike reviewed the footage frame by frame, Ellie came into the room, holding her sketchbook. She laid it on the desk. Do you think she hates me because I'm in a wheelchair? She asked quietly. Mike turned to her, kneeling to eye level. She hates what she doesn't understand. You scare her, because you remind her of what real strength looks like. Ellie didn't speak, but she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, across the street, Karen stood in her window watching. She raised a phone to her ear and smiled. The next day would change everything, but no one expected what she would do next. The next morning came too quietly. There was no violation letter, no HOA drone pacing the sidewalk, no email from Karen. The air felt wrong, too still. Mike noticed the silence first. No birdsong, no sprinklers humming from the neighbor's yard, not even the hum of distant lawnmowers. Ellie wheeled herself onto the porch with Bear, her sketchbook resting on her lap like armor. It's too quiet, she whispered. Mike scanned the street. His instincts screamed. Quiet wasn't peace, it was prelude. At 10:27 a.m. A black SUV rolled slowly down the cul-de-sac, no plates, tinted windows. It parked at the curb across the street. Mike stepped off the porch, eyes locked on the vehicle. Karen emerged, dressed in her usual pastel blouse and crisp white pants, but something about her gait was different. She didn't flounce like usual. She moved with determination, almost mechanical. Then the passenger door opened. A man climbed out. Late 40s leather jacket, buzz cut, the kind of man who didn't belong in a suburban HOA neighborhood. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm and marched toward Mike's driveway. Karen followed close behind. Mike stepped into the center of the yard, blocking their path. You're trespassing. The man smirked. I'm a private security enforcement officer. HOA has authorized an immediate removal of all non-compliant property features, including surveillance systems, Ellie's porch ramp, the cameras, even Bear's pen. Mike didn't flinch. You're bluffing. There's no legal grounds. Karen lifted a folder with a shaky hand. According to the updated bylaws, which passed this morning by emergency vote, your property is now in violation of health and safety codes. You've got 24 hours to comply or vacate. I never received notice of a vote. We hand-delivered it, Karen said with a smile. Maybe you missed it. Ellie called from the porch. Dad. Mike's eyes flicked to the SUV. The rear door was open slightly. A glint caught the light metal. Long, black. His heart dropped. Without breaking eye contact, he spoke slowly. Karen, I see the barrel of a rifle in your back seat. Karen's smirk slipped. The private security guy stiffened. Mike didn't move. You brought a weapon to my house. Karen's voice cracked. You're dangerous. You're training your daughter to use weapons. People have seen it. She's not a child, she's a threat. She's 12, Mike growled. In a wheelchair, and you came here armed. Suddenly, Bear growled deep and low. Then it happened. The SUV door swung open and a second man stepped out. holding what looked like a scoped hunting rifle. He raised it just enough for the barrel to rise above the door. Mike's body moved before his mind did. He dove sideways, reaching behind his lower back, drawing the concealed pistol from under his shirt. He didn't aim for the man with the rifle. He aimed at the ground. One deafening shot. Dust exploded near the SUV's tire. The sound ripped through the neighborhood like a thunderclap. Screams erupted. Ellie ducked behind Bear's body. The rifleman froze mid-motion, then dropped the weapon, and bolted. Karen shrieked. He's shooting. He's shooting at us. But neighbors had already come running out of houses. Phones raised, cameras pointed. One man shouted, "I've got it on video. That guy had a gun." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights danced across windows. 4 squad cars stormed the coal dash sack. Mike dropped his weapon, raised both hands, and stepped away. Karen, wild-eyed and red-faced, pointed at him, screaming, "Arrest him. He's dangerous." He fired a gun in a residential area. The officer, not Karen's brother, this time, held up a hand. "We'll let the body cams and neighbor footage decide that." He turned to Mike. "You got footage?" Mike nodded. Inside, the house, external angles, everything. As the officers began separating witnesses, Karen looked around, eyes darting, sweat beading on her forehead. For the first time, she realized, the neighborhood wasn't on her side anymore. The police were still sorting out statements when Ellie rolled into the living room, her face pale but composed, Bear pressed against her side. Ears perked as if waiting for the next order. Mike was pacing. The security footage was already loaded on his screen, every angle, every second. One clip showed the rifle barrel emerging from the SUV. Another captured Karen's smug expression moments before everything exploded. Most importantly, the audio was crisp. Karen's accusation, the fake HOA vote, and her claim that Ellie was a threat. A uniformed officer stepped inside. "Not Willoughby. Mr. Harrington," he said, his tone respectful. "We reviewed the footage. You were justified in discharging your weapon. You didn't aim to kill. You aimed to de-escalate." Mike gave a single nod. The man with the rifle contracted security. "Do you have a name?" Mike clicked through his footage, freezing a frame on the man's face. "Run that through facial recognition. I'm betting he's not licensed." The officer paused, then leaned in. "You might want to stay somewhere else tonight. This HOA lady. She's rattled. Something about her's off." Mike shook his head. "We're not the ones who should be leaving." Outside, the neighborhood buzzed. What was once a quiet collection of manicured lawns and color-coordinated mailboxes had turned into a miniature war zone. Neighbors stood in small clusters, pointing, whispering. Phones buzzed with next-door updates. Someone had already uploaded a cell phone clip of the confrontation to Facebook. The caption read, "Veteran Dad Stops Armed HOA Ambush, Hero or Criminal." Within hours, it had 12,000 shares. Karen's pristine kingdom was unraveling, but she didn't disappear by the following afternoon. She was back, this time flanked by 2 HOA board members, Mr. Grayson and a woman named Leela Park, both longtime allies who usually nodded at whatever Karen proposed. They stood in the middle of Mike's lawn like missionaries, ready to deliver judgment. "We've reviewed everything," Karen said, her voice brittle but rehearsed. "While your actions may not be criminal, they were certainly disruptive. You've made this neighborhood unsafe. People are frightened." Mike folded his arms. "People are frightened because someone brought a rifle to my house." Mr. Grayson cleared his throat. "There's talk of suspending your HOA voting rights, possibly more." "Let me guess," Mike said. "You'll push another emergency vote, hand-counted in your kitchen." Karen flinched. Lila glanced away. Mike continued, "I've pulled the county records. Your so-called HOA amendments. Illegally filed. Your security contractors. Not registered. And your surveillance fund. Drained into a private LLC. Karen's face drained of color. "You made a big mistake coming to my house with a weapon," he added. "But the bigger mistake? Leaving a paper trail." Karen's voice cracked. "You think anyone's going to care about some conspiracy theories? They'll care when the footage airs at 6 o'clock, Mike said. Channel 7 picked it up. They want an interview. My lawyer's arranging it." Grayson stepped back, visibly shaken. Karen stared at Mike, rage boiling behind her eyes. "You don't belong here." "You're right," Mike said, walking toward her. "I belong somewhere safe, with good people. And now, thanks to you, I'm making this place exactly that." Karen turned and stormed off. But Mike noticed something. Strange, her hand trembled as she gripped her phone. She wasn't just angry, she was scared. That night, Ellie said, "Do you think she's done?" Mike looked at her across the dinner table. "No," he said. "I think she's desperate. And that makes her more dangerous than ever." He wasn't wrong. Because Karen still had allies hidden in plain sight. And the next move she made would bring them out of the shadows. At 2 a.m., Mike was wide awake. He lay on the couch, pistol holstered beside him on the coffee table, a cup of black coffee cold in his hand. The security monitors flickered quietly, each feed casting ghostly shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, but little else moved. He didn't like this quiet. After the showdown on the lawn, the HOA had gone silent. No letters, no emails, no fines, nothing. It wasn't a ceasefire, it was Karen regrouping. He leaned forward, rewound the last few hours of porch footage, just shadows. Then, at 2:17, motion detected. His eyes sharpened. A black SUV again. The same model as before, crept by with its headlights off. It paused directly across from his driveway. The brake lights glowed, then dimmed, and then it reversed and vanished. Into the darkness. Mike was already moving. He grabbed the pistol, slipped his boots on, and locked the back door behind him. Quiet as fog, he stepped outside, scanning every angle. Nothing, but something was coming. He could feel it in his gut. The next day, the local news segment aired. The story was blunt. Retired Delta Force father fends off HOA gun threat. Clips from the porch footage were blurred but damning. Karen standing while a rifle glinted from her SUV. The station had also acquired financial documents. Mike had leaked anonymously. Misused HOA dues, falsified amendments, off-the-books fines. Public opinion shifted like a tide breaking over a dam. But not everyone was pleased. That afternoon, Mike received a text from a private number. "You're making enemies. Take your crippled daughter and leave before someone finishes what Karen started." He stared at the screen. No punctuation, no name, just venom. He forwarded it to the police. They were investigating, but nothing ever stuck. Later that evening, Ellie was on the porch sketching again, bear curled at her feet. When Mike heard a sound he hadn't heard in months, a click. A metallic click. He turned. Karen stood at the edge of the yard, face wild, her blouse wrinkled and hair undone. Her left hand trembled slightly as she raised a small black pistol. "Karen," Mike said, hands slowly rising. "Don't do this. She shouldn't be here," Karen hissed. Her voice was hoarse, raw. "You shouldn't be here. You think you're the hero, but you've poisoned everything. You turned them against me. This was my neighborhood." Behind him, Ellie froze. In her chair, Bear growled. Mike took a slow step forward. "Put it down. You're not thinking clearly. There are witnesses. There are cameras." "I don't care." Karen screamed, taking another step. She ruined everything with her chair and her eyes and her pitiful face. Mike's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked. Karen's hands were unsteady. The safety was off. The barrel wavering. Then she pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. The chamber was empty. Karen blinked, stunned, staring at the pistol like it had betrayed her. She tried again. Click. Mike moved fast. He rushed forward, grabbed the gun from her limp hand, and pinned her arms behind her back in one fluid motion. She didn't fight. She crumpled, sobbing, her shoulders shaking. Across the street, porch lights blinked on. Neighbors emerged. Phones were already recording. This time, the police didn't take 30 minutes. They arrived in 5 and Karen was in cuffs in less than 10. As she was led away, she screamed, "They were mine. The houses, the rules, the power. You don't belong here." Mike turned to the officers. "I want her tested for drugs, or something worse." Nobody sane pulls a gun on a child twice. One cop nodded grimly. "This isn't her first incident, but it's going to be her last." Back on the porch, Ellie looked up at her father. "You didn't even fire a shot this time." Mike nodded. "I didn't have to." But inside he knew it wasn't over. Not until the entire HOA board was exposed, because Karen hadn't acted alone. Karen was gone. The neighborhood was quieter, now too quiet. Like the air after a storm that didn't fully pass. Karen had been arrested, charged with attempted aggravated assault and criminal intimidation. The weapon, though unloaded, was registered to a deceased relative, and her mental evaluation flagged multiple red warnings. But for Mike Harrington, it didn't add up. He knew instability. He'd seen it in war zones and classified interrogation rooms. Karen was mentally unstable, Yes, but not unprovoked. Someone had fed her delusions, enabled them, and with her out of the picture, they'd either scatter or double down. Mike was betting on the latter. Ellie hadn't left the porch since the incident. She said she didn't want to go inside, she wanted to keep watch. Mike let her. He reinforced her wheelchair ramp again, doubled the cameras, and placed a second panic button on the porch wall. And then, on the third night after Karen's arrest, something arrived in their mailbox. It wasn't a letter. It was a USB drive, unmarked. Mike didn't hesitate. He scanned it through an isolated laptop, using software from his military days. The contents weren't what he expected. It was an HOA board Zoom recording, dated 3 days before the rifle incident. No labels, no context, just one video. He hit play. Karen's face appeared on screen. But it was the others that made his stomach twist. Grayson, Lila Park, 2 other board members he barely knew. All smiling, all calm, and all discussing him. He's dangerous, Grayson, said military type. You let one of those in. Suddenly everyone thinks they can break the rules. He's not just dangerous, Lila chimed in. He's persuasive. People are starting to question the fees. The amendments. If he goes public, we'll lose everything. What about his daughter? Someone else asked. Karen's voice answered, coldly, she's the key. She's his soft spot. You break her, you break him. Mike froze the video. His pulse beat in his ears. This wasn't just HOA corruption, it was a conspiracy. Suddenly, the fines, the poison, the surveillance, the armed intimidation, all of it had been coordinated. Karen had been the public face, but these people had sat behind their laptops and plotted psychological warfare against a disabled child. Mike backed up the video, uploaded it to a secure cloud server, then made 3 flash drive copies. One went under the seat of his truck. One he tucked inside Ellie's wheelchair pouch. The third went into a fireproof safe beneath his floorboards. That night, he visited Grayson. He didn't knock. He stood on the sidewalk, hands in his jacket, watching as Grayson watered his lawn like it was any other Tuesday. Grayson turned, startled. Mike, good evening, I saw the video, Mike said. All of it. Grayson's smile froze. Mike took a step forward. You let Karen try to weaponize fear against my child. You pretended to be neutral, but you plotted like a coward. Grayson tried to scoff. I have no idea what I have backups, Mike interrupted. And I have a meeting with Channel 7 tomorrow morning. They're very interested in HOA boards that use intimidation tactics and commit financial fraud. The watering hose slipped from Grayson's hand. Water gushed onto the sidewalk, unnoticed. I'm giving you 24 hours, Mike said, quietly, resign, publicly. Disband the HOA, return the funds, or I make you famous. Mike turned and walked away. Grayson didn't follow, but as Mike reached the corner of the block, a dark sedan pulled up beside him, windows tinted, engine quiet. It didn't stop, it just crawled past. And a voice through the cracked window said, You've made this bigger than a neighborhood, Harrington. Then it sped off. Mike's fists clenched because he now understood. This went far beyond a power-hungry HOA board. This was a network, and someone didn't want it exposed. Mike didn't sleep that night. The voice from the sedan echoed in his mind. You've made this bigger than a neighborhood. He reviewed the Zoom call again and again. The words, the looks, the calm tone of the people deciding whether to dismantle a disabled child. It wasn't just corruption. It was organized exploitation. He started digging. HOA documents, public records, real estate transactions. Hundreds of them all tied to a network of shell companies. Lila Park's name appeared under one LLC, Grayson under another. There were dozens of homes under management, all across the state, properties, foreclosed due to unpaid violations, then quietly flipped or rented at premium prices. This wasn't about HOA rules. It was about property acquisition. They weren't managing a community. They were harvesting it. Mike compiled everything: ownership transfers, meeting transcripts, video footage, the fake amendments. It became a 117-page dossier. He sent copies to 4 people: an investigative reporter at Channel 7, a district attorney he once rescued in Afghanistan, now running for office, a veteran-turned-activist with a massive online following, and a federal watchdog agency specializing in nonprofit and HOA fraud. And then he waited. But Grayson didn't wait. At dawn, Ellie's medical van was vandalized, tires slashed, back door pried open. The police came again, but this time, they found a listening device under the dashboard. It wasn't amateur work. This is military grade, the officer said, encrypted relay, not local law enforcement. Someone with deep connections put this here. Mike said nothing, but something inside him shifted. It was no longer just about Ellie's safety. It was about how many other families had been driven out of their homes, how many elderly homeowners had lost their life savings to Karen's fake fines. How many veterans or single mothers were turned away at closing tables because someone decided they were a poor aesthetic fit. Ellie stayed close that day. She sensed something had changed. At one point, as she sat sketching on the porch, she said without looking up, "What if they don't stop?" Mike crouched beside her. "They won't stop," he said. "But neither will I." That evening, the Channel 7 report aired a full investigative segment, hidden audio, fraud, exploitation. Quotes from frightened residents who finally found their voices. Faces blurred, names withheld, but the story was unmistakable. HOA Mafia. Secret network exposed for intimidation and property seizure scheme. Mike wasn't named, but his footage, his research, and Ellie's presence gave the story its soul. And by morning, it had spread across social media. But then, the knock came. Midnight, 3 loud thuds. Mike opened the door slowly, gun tucked. Discreetly, behind his back. 2 men stood on his porch. Suits, thin smiles. No badges. One of them flashed a silver card. "Mr. Harrington," he said, voice smooth, practiced. "We're with a private compliance firm. We'd like to speak to you about your recent activity involving confidential HOA board materials." Mike didn't blink. "I'll speak to your lawyers. We're not here to threaten you," the second man said. "We're here to offer a solution." "I'm not interested." "Oh, but you should be," the first man said. "Because, if you keep digging, Mr. Harrington, you're going to find that some of the people you're exposing are very well connected. And very dangerous." He smiled wider. "And we can't promise your daughter's safety if the wrong people feel cornered." Mike shut the door without another word, locked it, secured the windows, then sat across from Ellie, who had woken up eyes wide, already knowing. "Dad," she whispered. He looked at her calm as stone. "They just declared war," he said. "And tomorrow, I'm firing the first shot." At sunrise, Mike Harrington stood on his porch in full view of the neighborhood. His back straight, his military boots laced tight. Ellie sat beside him, sketchbook in her lap, though she wasn't drawing today. Bear lay at her feet, sensing the stillness of something about to break. Today was the day. Mike had given the enemy every chance. Now he was done waiting. A convoy of black SUVs pulled into Magnolia Ridge at exactly 8:03 a.m., not HOA thugs. Not private compliance men. These bore the insignia of the Department of Justice and the Office of Inspector General. Behind them, Channel 7's news van pulled up, followed by 3 unmarked sedans filled with federal agents. Mike stepped down from his porch and handed a manila envelope to the lead agent. "That's your roadmap. Names, companies, bank, transfers, everything you need to dismantle this network." The agent glanced through it and nodded. "We've been watching them for months. Your intel just gave us the match. Now we light the fuse." And light it, they did. The first arrest was Grayson still in his pajamas, trying to run with a duffel bag full of cash and a flash drive. He didn't make it past the mailbox. Lila Park was taken in from her office, screaming about slander and witch hunts. Within the hour, 17 others across the state were arrested in coordinated raids. Fake board members, shell company owners, corrupt code inspectors, and even 2 notaries who'd falsified HOA signatures. The news coverage exploded. National HOA corruption ring busted in suburban sting operation. Disabled child targeted by HOA father's evidence destroys criminal network. Hero vet exposes decade-long property scheme, calls for national HOA reform. Reporters flooded the street. But Mike gave only one statement. "They came for my daughter. That was their mistake." By noon, the state attorney general held a press conference. The case would trigger sweeping legal reforms, mandatory third-party auditing of HOA boards, background checks for private enforcement contractors, federal oversight for nonprofit property management groups. Karen, from her padded cell, watched the coverage in silence. She'd been diagnosed with paranoid delusions, but her part in the plot was no longer dismissed as the actions of a lone madwoman. She was the public face of something far deeper, darker, and finally, over. Back in Magnolia Ridge, change came fast. The HOA was formally dissolved by court order. Fines were voided. Surveillance was dismantled. Victims were offered restitution from the seized assets of the board members. The Harrington family received a formal public apology from the state and a community plaque placed at the neighborhood park in honor of Ellie Harrington, whose courage sparked justice. Mike didn't care about plaques. What mattered was this. Ellie smiled again. She returned to her porch, sketching. Neighbors stopped by not with complaints, but with lemonade, birdseed, and stories. For the first time since the move, Magnolia Ridge felt like a neighborhood, not a battlefield. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Ellie looked up from her sketchpad and asked, "Is it really over?" Mike looked around the empty HOA office, the quiet fences, the absence of fear. "Not forever," he said. "People like that don't just disappear. But they know what happens now if they come near us." She nodded. "Because you'll shoot them," he smiled faintly. "No, because I already did." He walked to the porch, placed a worn Delta Force coin on the railing, and saluted the flag fluttering gently above them. One shot had ended the war, but it was the truth that destroyed the empire. And from that truth they built something stronger than any HOA could ever manage. A home.